they're just two of the caregivers that has helped me throughout this past year. It takes a lot of people to help someone who's diagnosed with cancer get through some of the tough parts of their life. So these two have been an inspiration to me and have helped me through some pretty hard times. So sorry, I planned on printing out my speech tonight, but at the last minute my printer decided to stop printing, so I'm gonna have to read it off the laptop. Again, I got support, right? So before I get started, this might be a little tough.
That's okay, Darren.
I want to dedicate my relay to a friend of ours whose name is Louis Morgan. He passed away on July 21st of pancreatic cancer. He was 87 years old. So, you know, I'm usually good most of the time, but when I have to kind of talk about my story and people around me, the emotions come out. So it's an emotional journey that I've been on, and a lot of us have been on that same journey. Listening to George speak tonight, he almost told my story. So my cancer journey started last year in June. I had some very minor changes to my health, and I attributed them to my change of diet and my exercise regimen that I was doing at the time. There was nothing serious, so I didn't really think much of it. And I didn't really do anything about it. I let my wife know, and slowly over time things kind of started getting worse. I was never in any pain. There was nothing really extreme. Just some really minor things, but they weren't going away. So so they weren't quite going away either. And my wife was my fiance at the time. She kept asking me to go see my doctor, but I kept blowing it off. Thank God she's persistent.
Someone call that Maggie. Just kidding.
So I made an appointment, and my daughter went with me, and that was June 25th of last year. When I went to see the doctor that day, we planned to have a daddy-daughter day, and that was just a minor thing we had to do along the way. So I thought the appointment was going to be routine. I was just going in for a quick visit. You're going too fast. For a quick visit. Quick visit. Well, it wasn't a quick or routine visit as things turned out. It was far from it. When my doctor came into the room, she just stared at me, and I didn't really understand why. She wasn't saying anything, she was just looking at me. And it made me a bit uncomfortable. And after what seemed like an eternity, she asked me if I knew I was jaundiced. I told her that I hadn't noticed that. But I tell you what, every time I look into the mirror now, I definitely look at the whites of my eyes. to see if they've changed color. Those were the symptoms I was having. Nothing major, but nothing I would attribute to anything serious. She was immediately concerned, my doctor, and she sent me to the ER in San Jose at the Santa Teresa Kaiser. She thought I had a gallstone. The ER department, they were ready for me when I arrived and got me prepared for an ERCP, which is a procedure where they give you an IV sedation, and they go in down your throat into your stomach to remove the gallstone. And at that time, they also put a stent in my bile duct to open it up so the gallstone would make its way out. After I woke up from the procedure, I was told that I'd be staying the night in the hospital and that the doctor would be in to see me at some point. So I had to call my fiance. She was at work, to tell her the news. That was a difficult call to make. My daughter was with me at the time, and we've been honest with her throughout the whole thing. Where are we at? We went too far. We went too far. Right there, tell her news. That was a difficult call to make. She came to the hospital after work, picked up my daughter, and had to drop her off with her mom. She was getting ready to go to Hawaii for a week, my daughter. So after she dropped her off at her mom's house, she came back to the hospital. And the next morning, June 26th, the doctor came in, and he informed us that they didn't find a stone. Instead, they found a tumor. They found a tumor on my pancreas. And they were waiting for lab work to come in to either confirm or deny it. On June 30th, a couple days later, against my doctor's advice, my girlfriend, fiance, her dad, and I drove to Idaho on a trip we'd already planned to visit her brother. When we got back a week later, on July 9th, I had a procedure to implant what they call a Metaport. It's a device they implant under the skin, and they have a catheter that goes into your vein, and they use that to inject chemo. So by this point, the doctor had already come in and talked to us, told us about the tumor, and he said he'd had enough experience with these things that even though we hadn't got the results back, he believed it was a cancerous tumor. So that they implanted the device, and the device was used to inject chemo. So on July 23rd, I started chemo. It was a 50-hour procedure. It's all right. So it was a 50-hour procedure, and I had to do that every 2 weeks. I'd go into the hospital, the infusion center, and I would be there for 4 hours. At the end of the 4 hours, they would send me home with a pump, and the pump would continue to pump chemo in for 46 hours. So that lasted for a total of 600 hours. We had 12 procedures. On August 3rd, my girlfriend and I were eating dinner, as Kendall said, here in town. And when we left, we noticed the ribbon and the sign underneath, and we went to the Relay for Life event at that time and found out exactly what Relay for Life was. Being newly diagnosed, it felt good to be around people that had a similar condition. But it was also sad because there was a lot of, in memory of, and I was so confused at the time. All I knew about pancreatic cancer was that it was deadly. So we continued to follow the doctor's advice, continue to take chemo, and as this was going on, we were finding out about a thing called an advance directive that the hospital said that we needed to have. And an advance directive is basically what you want to have happen in case you don't make it through the procedure, or if you do make it through the procedure and you're not quite the same as you were before, what directions you want them to take. So I had to look at basically the end of my life and how I wanted it to end or not, or what was going to happen. So a lot of those things, you never expect to have to look at or face. It was a difficult time, but again, I had a huge support group. So after we found this out, they also said that since my girlfriend, fiance at the time, we weren't married, that she didn't necessarily have the right to be in the room or to get any results from any tests. So we decided at that point that we needed to pick a date and get married. So on August 11th, my daughter, my wife now, and a bunch of friends of ours went to a spot that we like in the mountains, and we got married. It was one of the best days of my life. I know that cancer can be very devastating, but for me, the diagnosis was only one part of it. There were so many positive things that have happened along the way, and one of them was being married to my best friend. And having my daughter there to witness it as well. So on October 17th, I had my last chemo treatment before surgery. The doctor wanted to make sure that I was healed enough and healthy enough for surgery. It was my 8th treatment. On December 4th, I had surgery and spent December 7th, 8th, and 9th in the ICU. Things didn't go quite as planned. So the surgery went really well. Everybody was surprised at how fast I was recovering. And the night before we were getting ready to leave, I asked my wife to stay with me because in the morning we were going to leave and I wanted her there so we could get out of there as soon as possible. I was tired of being in the hospital. Yeah, I was very impatient. So that night I started feeling bad. I wasn't feeling quite right. And I went into the bathroom, started getting sick, and next thing I know, I was passed out. I fainted, and I vaguely remember people running into the room. I remember a lot of commotion, and then I woke up in the ICU. I started bleeding internally and didn't know it, and thank God for the nurses and doctors. They were able to go in and cauterize the part that was bleeding and bring me back to health again. So on January 16th, after getting out of the hospital and recovering, I started chemo again. And on February 26th, I had my 12th and final IV chemo treatment. The doctor said at that point, my oncologist said at that point, that the treatment with him was over and I was cancer-free.
Woo!
So, you know, we went and celebrated, had a great time. The next visit we had with the doctor, he suggested radiation. Not because I had cancer, but because the potential of it coming back was pretty good. So he explained to me that radiation was an option. But he also said that radiation could cause cancer. And that it was something that I would have to decide whether I wanted or not. So, talking with my wife, we both decided that radiation was probably a good option. So, I started radiation on March 25th, and then they also gave me a chemo pill called Xeloda. So I was taking a chemo pill and I was doing radiation. I was doing that once a week for 5 weeks at the Kaiser in Santa Clara. I'm sorry, every day, once a day, every day for 5 weeks. I made it through that, finished on May 14th. I've had a few blood tests since then, and I've had a few CAT scans since then. My numbers keep going down, and they have no evidence of disease. So at this point, I'm cancer-free. And I'm here to give support to anyone that needs it. For me, having cancer was difficult, but it was also easy because I was told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, where to go. I just followed directions. The caregivers, they're the ones that had the difficult time. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know what I needed. So it was me trying to help them as much as they were trying to help me that took my mind off of what I had. You know, Kendall mentioned time. I know that we only have one day at a time. And that was sort of my focus. You know, we never know how much time we have, and we never know when that time's gonna end. So it could end from cancer, it could end from a lot of different things. I'm extremely grateful and blessed to be here tonight. I hope I can continue one day at a time to live this life with this family, with my caregivers and support group. And I really appreciate everyone coming out and supporting the American Cancer Society and being a part of Relay for Life. Thank you guys very much.